Stephanie Law is a professional watercolor artist who built a successful career out of doing exactly what she loves the most: illustrations of fantastical dreamworld imagery. She also created the famous Mini Palette, a watercolor palette that carries up to 37 colors. Join us today as we talk about why ignoring others can set you on the right path, how Stephanie's computer science background informed her art journey, and what it means to truly make a living out of your passion. Hi, I'm Anya, and this is Make More Art, a podcast by Etcher meant to inspire you to keep on creating. Now let's hear from our guest. When did you realize that art was something that you wanted to do for a living?
I always wanted to do art from when I could remember the first person asking me, what do you want to be when you grow up? But unfortunately, over the course of the next 16 years from there, I was discouraged from doing art by pretty much everyone, including career advisors at school and all the people that were supposed to advise me on how to proceed with a successful life. So I disregarded the idea that I could actually make a living off of art for a really long time, and I kind of relegated it to the sidelines and decided to pursue a practical career of being in computer science. But then over the course of my time in college, I came to realize that art needed to have a central role in my life, otherwise I wasn't going to be happy. And this came about sort of in my final year when I was in college, and I had just gone to a career fair for software.
Oh.
And I had been successfully talking to a number of startup companies, and it was a successful event by the measure of these things. And I had lined up several more in-depth interviews to go to in the next few weeks, and I got back to my room and I was just profoundly depressed.
Wow.
And I didn't even understand myself why I was so depressed. And it wasn't until I sat down to sort of examine what was going on inside me that I realized that it was because I felt that at this career fair I was taking that final step, into adulthood and into a finalized career, and I was going to be definitively leaving art as an option behind.
Forever.
Yeah, at least it felt that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the moment when I realized I can't do that. I don't care what everyone's been telling me. I don't care what the sensible thing is that people have been telling me to pursue. And I was like, I need to do art. I need to have a central role in my life, not just on sidelines, not just as a hobby. I needed it to be my career. And so it was in that moment that I really started thinking about the logistics of it and how I was going to set about and make this happen. And I told myself initially in that moment, I was like, all right, I'm going to give myself a timeline of 2 years.
Wow.
I'm going to do the software thing because I've gotten this far with it. I'm going to go through these interviews. I'm going to probably take one of these job offers, but I want to really be on top of I don't want to just sort of dabble with the art. I want to actually focus on it and turn that into something real for me. And so I told myself 2 years. In actuality, it was more like 3 years before it finally really happened, when I was able to quit that software job and dive full steam into the art. And that was a really happy day.
And where did you, because many people don't realize that art is a career. When did that click for you?
It didn't fully click. It wasn't even like I said, there's a specific art job that I'm going to take. It was just like, I need to somehow start to make a plan to make this happen. And so the first thing I did at that point was, I looked at what kind of art I was doing, which was fantasy oriented. And at the time it looked like basically the only career path options for someone that was interested in doing the art that I did was to do illustration work of some kind for fantasy gaming companies, for book covers in magazines. And so the first thing I did was I just walked into a bookstore and started looking through the shelves and seeing what the names of the publishers were for the various books and publications that I saw my type of art being
the first
on.
thread, and you started pulling
Yeah,
from there.
and so that was the first step, and it was just step by step. I just took it one step at a time, and so at that, I went to this bookstore, I wrote down the names of the publishers, and then I started calling them and sending them emails and finding out what the art submission policy was for this. And from there, I found out about conventions, fantasy conventions, and I started attending those, and that led to more connections and more direct connections to art directors, because at some of these conventions, they are very large events for the games and the publications that produce these types of things. And so, I looked to see where my art would fit in, and then looked to try to find how I could fit my art into that spot. And, slowly, one step at a time, it proceeded that way. And I got really lucky also because, I had started with the software on the other side of things. And at the time when I was doing all of this, the internet was really just getting off the ground, with people starting to realize they could buy stuff on the internet. And artists had not yet figured out any way of getting their art online, because it was still a really new thing. And so my background in software turned out to be this huge asset, because I was able to then create a website. And it was a very simple website at first, but even that was not something that most artists were capable of doing. So I started creating my own website. I started selling my art online in conjunction with all this other stuff that was going on, where I was going to look up publishers and going to conventions and things, and people started finding me, and all these things started working together. All of them started gelling. It wasn't any one thing that makes or breaks it, but it was all of them happening at the same time. And I was also contributing to websites where a publisher of watercolor technique books, well, actually, they're a publisher of technique books in general, found me. And I had just written a free article on a blog about how to paint with acrylics at the time, and it was free content. Yeah, it was free content. I was just doing it because I enjoyed doing this, and it was I was a member of this community of fantasy artists, and so I was just sharing my information, sharing what I knew, and a publisher came across my article and they liked what I had written, and they approached me and said, "Would you like to write a whole book about how to draw angels, fairies, and mermaids?" Oh. And so they just tossed that at me, and I said, "Sure." And I said, "Well, at this point, I'm actually not painting in acrylics," because at first they asked me to do it in acrylics. That was what my article was about. And I said, "Well, I'm doing watercolors now. Is that okay?" And they said, "Yep, do that." And so I did that, and that book became a bestseller for this publisher. And all these things were happening at the same time, all these multiple threads. It wasn't any one thing that I could just do and just leave. It was constant looking for opportunities, looking for windows, and eventually all of this started to gel, and it got to a point where I felt comfortable leaving my software job. And so 3 years into the software and hustling art on the side, I dropped the software and went full-time into the art. I am going to go insane if I don't make this the center of my life. I have to do it.
There you go.
No question about it.
What was the biggest art struggle that you ever faced, and how did you overcome it?
So the biggest struggle for me, I think, was figuring out my niche in art, figuring out how to label myself. And actually, more to the point, I guess it was figuring out how to abandon labels for myself and to kind of create my own. Because when I was in school, I actually studied fine art alongside with the computer science. So I did do fine art, but the program I was in was very focused on abstract expressionism, and it was more of a fine modern art program, because I had not gone to this school for the art. I had gone there for the computer science. So it was just, take whatever art classes they offered and whatever art program they had there. So I did the art there, but it was very counter to the kind of art I wanted to create, because I was very much in a more representative and illustrational vein of things. So I struggled with it at that point, and I struggled with labels starting from there even, because I realized, well, I'm not this kind of artist. I'm not the kind of artist that they are trying to mold here at this school and in this program. And so what am I? What do I do? What do I create on my own? And so I did the program, I went through it, I graduated with that, but even then on the side, I was already starting to try to find my own voice and try to find what I was doing on my own. Mm-hmm. And I started doing digital art at that point, which was a big no-no in the program. They were like, no. Digital art is evil. That's just, yeah. So already I was rebelling against that, and I was just kind of creating my own thing. But that was all on the side. In classes I was the good little student, and I did the thing of throwing paint off onto the canvases and hurling stuff onto metal plates off the second story window and seeing what happens. And that was fun in its own way. And I think that background actually influenced my appreciation of the abstract and of patterns and of textures, which I still love now. And I have eventually come around full circle to integrating that into my current methods of working. So there is this very strange cycle of how all of that eventually fit together with what I do now, even though it's so different from what I do now. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. There's labels, right? And I was already outside of that label, and I said, well, I'm just going to do my own thing. I want to do illustration. But I found, even as I embarked into that I wasn't really an illustration label either. That fully didn't fit me. Mm-hmm. The types of art, sure, there were fantasy type imagery that I was doing, but it didn't quite fit in with the very more of the realistic styles that were popular for book covers and for depictions of monsters and creatures in the games and books, because I actually didn't like doing monsters very much. I mean, I liked doing creatures and things, but that didn't fit me either. It wasn't really me what was in that area as an illustrator of fantasy art. And so, I found myself in this weird place where that was the only visible path that I could see, that I could envision at that point in time, of how to become a professional artist and make a living out of this. Mm-hmm. And it was, all these labels circling around me, and I was trying to figure out, how does my art fit into this? And I just eventually decided, well, I'm just going to do what I love then. I'm just going to start painting my own thing, and maybe the right label will find me. And it did start happening, because, I was not doing the same art as the other fantasy illustrators. And eventually, I took my portfolio around to various publishers, and publishers started noticing that my art was different. And I started getting people approach me who wanted my look. They were not after the look of what everyone else was doing. They were after my watercolor look that was less realism, unique. And it was a unique look, yes. And so it became my voice, and it became a way of just I could do what I wanted to do, and the work that I wanted to do came and found me slowly. And if I had just kept trying to force myself into the box of what...
pigeonholing yourself into...
of what I thought I should do, then I would have been making art that I wouldn't really enjoy, and I wouldn't be getting the jobs that people, the people that were looking for something different wouldn't have ever found me, because they would just see me as another one of these people. So it was funny that I started just doing my own thing, and as a result of doing my own thing, it became my thing. And over time, I was able to just do fewer and fewer commissions and work more and more and focus on my own projects and focus on my own vision and what I wanted to do. And I came to trust my own instincts about this more, because I learned that when I followed my instincts and just did what I wanted to do, stuff that was authentic to me and my own vision and my own voice, that spoke to people more, that people resonated with it, because they could see the things that I was seeing. And it was because I wasn't listening to someone outside voice dictating what I should do or what I needed to do in order to be successful, but just doing what I felt like I needed to do, not to be successful, but to be satisfied as an artist and to have my creative drives answered and to really listen to that.
Wonderful. Any words to our listeners who are struggling with the same kind of thing that you struggled, who really want to make a career out of art but they have no idea?
The thing I would say is just listen to your instincts and don't let what you perceive the public desires or needs from you ever to dictate what you create. You need to be authentic to what you want to create, because that's going to produce the best art.
Wonderful.
And that is what I call a mic drop. When was the last time you did something just because you loved it? And how did that make you feel? Please share your story with us and find all the show notes on the post associated with this episode at etchrlab.com/SBMlaw. That's etchrlab.com/SBMLAW. Like the podcast? Please help us by subscribing and giving us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts at etchrlab.com/Apple. Thank you for listening and see you next time. Until then, let's make more art.